Not only was he born into the Runcandle family, Mel went on bitterly, but he's got heaven-defying luck on top of that. Meanwhile, there are people who work themselves to the bone and still can't rise above being ordinary cadets. It was the kind of complaint people made when admiration and jealousy got tangled together. I don't know how strong the others are, he continued, lowering his voice. But young Master Jean is only just under 4-star level, right? And the people in his new group are all around 3-star. Isn't that how it is? Then he turned and asked, Hey, Kajin, are we really just going to let this pass? After hearing the question, Kajin Romero remained silent for a brief moment before answering in a cold, restrained voice. No, but what exactly do you expect us to do? His eyes were sharp and unpleasantly calm. Even if he's the youngest and most looked down on of the young masters, he's still a pure-blooded member of the Runcandle family. Until Lady Mew gives a direct order, we can't touch him. Then, in the middle of speaking, Kajin Romero suddenly stopped. His expression shifted, and he turned his head toward one direction as if he had sensed someone standing there, listening. Jean Runcandle was already standing right in front of them. For a moment, the atmosphere froze completely, and not a single one of them could say anything. The air itself felt awkward and sharp. Huh? Did he hear everything? One of them whispered in alarm. No way, not from that far away. But their hope died immediately when Jean gave them a faint smile and said, Too bad. I heard all of it, my dear friends. His tone was light, but it carried just enough edge to make them stiffen. The two who had been gossiping most openly were left stunned. Their earlier envy vanished in an instant, replaced by the sick, embarrassed silence of people who had just been caught speaking too freely. Then Jean Runcandle looked directly at one man and asked, Kajin Romero, how's your right hand? The question sounded casual, but that only made it feel more unsettling. Kajin Romero remained seated, his sharp gaze sinking into the shadows as he answered, It's fine. His voice was clipped and emotionless. The medical staff said reattaching it wasn't difficult. It was a clean cut, so there wasn't much trouble. Even so, the memory of that injury still clearly stung his pride. I see, Jean Runcandle said calmly. Still, it sounds like you all were having a pretty interesting conversation. His expression remained unreadable, and that calmness made the remark land harder than if he had sounded angry. Kajin Romero answered with open sarcasm. Yes, the worst thing lowly people like us can do, standing in front of young Master Jean, is talk badly about you behind your back. So please forgive us. But Jean, still expressionless, replied, Whether I forgive you or not doesn't really matter, does it? I'm not even a knight yet. And besides, this has nothing to do with the rest of them, does it? Kajin Romero immediately raised his voice in protest, disrespectful and sharp. To be precise, are you saying you can't just drag people like me out and beat us down with a single word? Jean looked at him again and asked, Why would I do that? Kajin sneered and answered louder, Because I'm being pretty insolent right now. And because I find you unpleasant to look at, Kajin Romero added. Mel tried to cut in at once. Hey, Kajin, what are you doing? But Kajin had already begun to rise to his feet. Is that so? He said, his face turning serious. Then let me be honest. Watching the young master stand here, praised by everyone after completing a mission through nothing but luck, it's not pleasant at all. Jean Runcandle stood straight and answered without backing away. I think you've misunderstood something. His voice was steady, and his posture did not waver. The reason I said you were unpleasant to look at wasn't because you mocked me, and it wasn't because you were disrespectful either. Before Kajin Romero could answer, Jean reached up and lightly touched the hilt of his sword. Then he continued, Kajin Romero, a 5-star knight. The way he said the name was sharp and deliberate, like he was laying out the facts before judgment. Your skill surpasses that of many other intermediate cadets, Jean Runcandle said. In fact, you may even be stronger than I am right now. So why are you standing around talking behind people's backs instead of facing them directly? The moment he finished speaking, a fierce spark flashed in his eyes, and he drew his sword in a clear challenge. I'm sure I told you before, Jean said, now pointing his blade straight at Kajin Romero, that you can challenge me anytime. Then he asked again, So? Is that really all right with you? Jean did not wait for fear to show. Yes, raise your sword. There's no reason for you to hold back. Let's settle it. At those words, Kajin Romero's face darkened, and his eyes filled with raw killing intent. "It sounds like you're saying we don't need limits when we fight," he said. Jean answered without hesitation. "That's right." Kajin gripped the hilt of his sword and warned him, "You're going to regret this." Then, unable to hold himself back any longer, Kajin Romero lunged forward and brought his sword down in a heavy, violent slash. There was no testing strike in it. From the very beginning, he meant to overwhelm Jean with force. Jean Runcandle reacted quickly and raised his own sword to block. Steel slammed against steel with a clean, sharp sound, and the impact drove tension straight through both of their arms. Even while fighting, Jean kept his mind clear. His attacks really are strong, he thought. But compared to the people I'll have to face in the future, this is still nothing. Across from him, Kajin Romero poured all his strength into another swing, his face already twisting with fury and obsession. Jean Runcandle continued calmly analyzing the flow of the fight, blocking one dangerous strike after another. Even with lethal pressure coming at him, his eyes stayed sharp, as if he were studying the battle as much as surviving it. At that moment, however, Jean seemed to be getting pushed back. His footing slid, his guard tightened, and to anyone watching from the outside, it looked as though Kajin Romero had gained the clear upper hand. Kajin's arrogant, premature voice rang out with a nasty edge. "Do you see the truth now, young master? You're still far too weak compared to me." He rushed in again, sword raised high as if he intended to cut Jean Runcandle cleanly in two. Jean gritted his teeth and lifted his sword to block the downward strike. The impact was heavy enough to jar his whole body, but his stance held just enough to keep the blade from breaking through. But while Jean Runcandle's attention was fixed on the sword crashing toward him, a second attack was already driving straight at his chest from another angle. It came fast, low, and without warning. It was Kajin Romero's kick. The blow landed solidly, and Jean was thrown backward by the force of it. The attack was dirty, direct, and perfectly timed to disrupt his balance. Kajin did not stop there. The very next moment, he unleashed a curved slash of sword energy, sweeping forward like a drawn bow suddenly released. The attack tore through the air with frightening speed. Jean Runcandle looked straight ahead with a startled expression, and then, unexpectedly, joy flared in his heart. "I can see it," he thought. In the middle of danger, something inside him had clicked into place. Jean bent backward to dodge the deadly slash by the narrowest possible margin, moving just like the day he had avoided Haytona Runcandle's iron ball. The memory of that brutal training flashed through him, and his body responded almost on instinct. "I'm starting to see Kajin Romero's attack trajectory," Jean realized. At that exact moment, a few strands of hair at his forehead were sliced away by the passing blade. The attack had barely missed him, close enough to prove how sharp his reading had become. As Kajin Romero continued throwing out one sword strike after another, Jean began analyzing even more deeply. There are countless ways to shape techniques that cut through space, he thought, but a five-star knight can't use that many of them freely. That limitation was the key he had been looking for. After regaining his composure, Jean Runcandle focused seriously on defense and timing. Kajin Romero's anger toward him was now clouding his judgment, and that made his patterns easier to read with each passing exchange. Kajin's face was badly twisted with rage by now, his teeth clenched so hard it looked as though he might lose control at any second. The more the fight dragged on, the more his temper bled into every move. Then the two swords collided head-on once again. The clash rang out sharply, and sparks jumped between the blades as both fighters pushed power straight into the center of the exchange. "I can finish this in 3 moves, Jean Runcandle calculated in silence. Then, with a steady, confident voice, he said, "I can read every move you make. You can't win." The moment Kazan heard those words, the anger already burning inside him flared even hotter. He let out a sharp, bitter sneer and glared at Jean Runcandle with bloodshot eyes. "You're still wasting your breath on nonsense, young master," he snapped, sounding more insulted than confident. Then, as if the last thread of reason had finally snapped, he threw himself forward and attacked with everything he had. Jean Runcandle, however, stayed unervingly calm, reading the flow of the fight step by step. A slash came from the left, then a sudden attempt to lunge in and bite at his head like a cornered beast. Jean answered with a clean counterslash and immediately stepped back to avoid the follow-up. And right at that tense moment, Kazan, who had been fighting like a man possessed, suddenly froze as though he had sensed something terrifying. His final strike died halfway through his thoughts, and the blade in Jean Runcandle's hand began to release a dense, surging stream of power that made the air itself feel heavier. It was an aura so overwhelming, so sharp and absolute, that someone at the 4-star level could never even dream of stopping it head-on, let alone enduring it. Jean Runcandle did not hesitate for even a heartbeat. He released that slash at once, cleanly and decisively, as if the outcome had already been settled the moment he moved. Kazan was blown backward in an instant. The sword in his hand flew high into the air, spinning wildly as dust, pebbles, and broken bits of stone burst up around him from the force of the impact. Kazan's body hit the ground stiffly, and for a moment it was clear that what crushed him was not the pain, but the shock. His face twisted with disbelief as he stared up and shouted, "How? How is this possible?" That last attack was definitely. Now Jean Runcandle stepped toward him without hurry, lowered the tip of his sword toward Kazan's face, and spoke in a calm voice that only made the defeat feel even more crushing. "Now I know how many more years it'll take before I reach the 5-star level for real." Jean Runcandle stood there in complete control, tall and unshaken, declaring it almost like a verdict rather than a boast. At those words, Kazan's face darkened even further, and cold sweat broke out across his skin. Frustration, humiliation, and disbelief all mixed together as he gritted out, "You deceived me, didn't you? I had no idea you were already at the 5-star level." Jean Runcandle cut him off at once. "No, I never did anything like that." His answer came so quickly and so evenly that it left no room for argument. "It's just that you don't know me well enough," Jean Runcandle said with quiet confidence as he lowered his sword. "I would never walk into a fight if I truly believed I was going to lose." There was no arrogance in his tone, only certainty. Just then, the Tana twins came rushing over in alarm and shouted, "Hey, what happened here?" Their footsteps were hurried, but their voices faltered the instant they drew close enough to see the scene. The two brothers froze on the spot, stunned speechless for a beat. Jean Runcandle was standing calmly, while Kazan sat collapsed on the ground with a dark, shaken expression, clearly unable to accept what had happened. The twins stared in disbelief and blurted out, "What? What is this? How is that even possible?" The youngest actually defeated Kazan. At that, Jean Runcandle simply walked past them and said in an almost casual tone, "It's not that impressive." His indifference only made the result feel even more unreal. The two brothers remained rooted in place, still dazed, and could only turn their heads to stare after him as he left, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Yeah, that's right. The scene then shifts elsewhere, and in a colder, heavier atmosphere, a doubtful voice rang out once more. "So you're saying you were completely crushed by the youngest?" Kazan stood there reporting with his head lowered, his shame plain on his face. "I am deeply ashamed." From behind the chair, the seated figure questioned him again in a hard, suspicious tone. "You didn't take a bribe, did you? Or go easy on him just because he's a member of the Runcandle family?" Kazan immediately answered, "Not at all, my lady." Miu Runcandle continued, still unable to make sense of it. "Then what is it? Are you seriously telling me that a 15-year-old newcomer reached the 5-star level in such a short time?" Her doubt was sharp, but beneath it was something closer to unease. Kazan denied it again with a strained voice. "It wasn't just me. Everyone at the training ground saw it. That aura was definitely beyond the 5-star level." Hearing that, Miu Runcandle's face fell with open disappointment. Forget it. It was my mistake to rely on someone like you. Get out." Kazan had no choice but to bow his head and silently accept the humiliation. After he left the room, the other two remaining figures fell silent for a moment. Then one of them slowly raised their head and asked in a low voice, "Is the youngest threatening us now?" "Now." Miu Runcandle answered immediately, her tone cold and cutting. "Not just us. He's becoming a threat to the entire clan." A clear, sinister look spread across her face as she continued, "For the youngest's next mission, we need to slip our own people in. That must be where he's headed next. So when he returns, she said, her expression turning darker still. He should return as nothing more than a corpse. The scene changes again, this time to Jean Runcandle's room. Gilly McLaurin entered carrying a few things and said, "Young master, the Sword Garden is in an uproar right now. Everyone is amazed by what you've accomplished." Looking down from the window, Jean Runcandle replied, "Really?" "In the entire history of the Runcandle family," he went on thoughtfully, "the only ones who became 5-star knights at the age of 15 were the first patriarch, my father, and my sister Luna Runcandle." Even saying it aloud made the weight of that fact settle more heavily in the room. "So that means I now have 5-star swordsmanship, 4-star magic, and 5-star shadow energy," Jean Runcandle murmured, laying out the truth piece by piece, as if he still needed to hear it to fully believe it himself. "I didn't even expect my swordsmanship to break through to 5 stars yet. I was only training with the clarity stones the way I always do, and somehow, I've already reached this point." There was no empty pride in his voice, only honest surprise. Leaning against the window frame, Jean Runcandle looked outside and quietly organized his thoughts. "It seems like when one of my 3 powers grows stronger, shadow energy, magic, or aura, the others are affected too. Before, when I overloaded my shadow energy, it also opened up the flow of aura and mana." The more he thought about it, the more clearly the pattern emerged. Since I'm the only person who possesses all 3, there's no proper record or information to compare it to, but they're definitely connected. Then, in the middle of that thought, he suddenly turned around, as if something near the window had caught his attention. Seeing the flower pot resting on the windowsill, he asked, "Did you put these flowers here, Gilly McLaurin?" She nodded and replied, "Yes. The vase was empty while you were away, so I thought the room looked too bare and added some flowers." "Should I throw them away?" she asked. Jean Runcandle quickly stopped her. "No, there's no magic on them. No curse either, so it's fine." Hearing that, Gilly McLaurin replied, "I know." Even so, Jin's caution showed he was already expecting more danger from those around him. "Anyway, once word gets out that I became a 5-star knight at 15, my brothers are going to start moving nervously," Jean Runcandle said as he sat down, his expression growing serious. "That includes my brother Joshua Runcandle, the one currently nominated as the next head of the family." "Joshua Runcandle," he continued. "After Luna Runcandle gave up her status as the first flag bearer, he became the strongest candidate to succeed as head of the Runcandle clan." The name alone carried a heavy political weight. With the support of his mother, Rosa Runcandle, he has already secured his footing to a remarkable degree. His position has become stable, and not many inside the clan would dare challenge it openly. Murakin was sprawled across the table the whole time, lazily stuffing himself with sweets while listening to Jean Runcandle's analysis. Jean went on, "Even though hiding my abilities for now wouldn't be a bad strategy, I decided that openly revealing what I've achieved would benefit me more. Now that news of me reaching 5 stars has already leaked, it won't stay inside Runcandle territory for long. My name will spread beyond the clan. Stories about me will probably be published all over the world." He understood very well that fame could be both a weapon and a shield. After hearing that, Murakin licked one of his paws and spoke in a relaxed, almost mocking tone. "Oh my, look at our little boy praising himself again. Still, if you really become the center of attention, your brothers won't be able to move as carelessly as before." Jean Runcandle nodded without hesitation. "Exactly. More importantly, Father will come to the Sword Garden himself." The moment those words left his mouth, both Gilly McLaurin and Murakin visibly stiffened in surprise. "Father wants an heir other than Joshua Runcandle," Jean Runcandle said. "As for my sister Luna Runcandle, Father was interested in her, but not in the same way. He has never truly been satisfied with any of my siblings. But Luna Runcandle, the only one who ever genuinely caught Father's attention, had no interest in taking the throne herself. And because of that, Father ultimately judged her unsuitable to lead the clan. After that, Joshua Runcandle's place as the next head of the family became even more solid. My brother Dyphus Runcandle, my sister Mew Runcandle, and my sister Mary Runcandle were left as reserve heirs. It was a stable arrangement on the surface, at least until now. That succession order had been extremely stable," Jean Runcandle said, still calculating everything in his head. But the moment I appeared, that balance started to crack. His eyes hardened slightly. Father doesn't care about age. He gives everyone a chance. So he'll issue me a command, just like he did when I was still among the lower ranks. I'm sure Father's order will contain two things, he continued. First, a challenge, whether I can overcome the age gap and stand against my older brothers, the heirs ahead of me. Second, protection, because Father does not want me to die at my brother's hands before I've even been tested properly. I'm a special case, and he knows it. At that point, Gilly McLaurin added, if your story really gets printed in the newspapers, her expression turning thoughtful as she imagined the scale of it all. Then letters will pour in from noble families, factions, and organizations from all over the world asking to visit or make contact. The flood of attention would be impossible to ignore. You're right, Jean Runcandle replied. The best way to deal with all of that is to handle it in one move instead of letting it drag on. There's nothing better for that than a banquet. Once Father arrives, a banquet will be held. His tone was calm, but the decision behind it was firm and deliberate. Gilly McLaurin, go and start preparing for it. Jean Runcandle gave the order naturally, already moving several steps ahead in his mind. Then he did not forget to raise a finger toward Murakin as well, pointing at the black dragon in warning, as if to remind him not to cause trouble while everything was being set in motion. You need to be especially careful with Murakin. If he secretly turns himself into a human and slips into the banquet unnoticed, we'll have a real disaster on our hands. You understand that, right? Jean Runcandle said seriously, making it clear that this was not a joke, but a very real warning. Hearing that, Murakin looked genuinely offended for a second, then jumped up in protest. Hey, what do you take me for? A child? I already know that. But before he could complain any further, Gilly McLaurin quickly cut in and bowed her head. I understand, young master. I'll handle it exactly as you said. But first, where are the baked goods? Just like that, several days passed in a blur. One morning, Gilly McLaurin stood arranging flowers and said in a bright, cheerful voice, it seems the butlers have been extremely busy lately, answering official letters one after another. Young master, when I asked Pedro about it, he said even the royal family of Vermont sent an official letter. Jean Runcandle looked up and replied with mild surprise. The imperial royal family? That is unexpected. They must be very curious about me. Gilly McLaurin then continued with the latest update. The patriarch has already sent word of his visit through Khan. He plans to arrive in a month, and the visiting schedules for the other clans are being adjusted around that. But strangely enough, the other young masters and young ladies have all gone very quiet. Jean Runcandle calmly closed the book he had been reading and answered without much emotion. If they try to punish me while I'm attracting this much attention, it would be the same as openly announcing that they fear me or hate me. For the sake of appearances alone, they won't move recklessly right now. At that moment, Murakin suddenly shoved the door open in a panic, his usual lazy attitude nowhere to be seen. Young master, he blurted out, breathing hard and speaking so quickly he almost tripped over his own words. You've just been assigned a mission. But that mission is the Cologne ruins. The way he said it made the room instantly feel colder, as if the very name carried a bad omen. The scene shifts to another place, where fury was already erupting like a storm. A furious voice rang out, heavy with rage and contempt. So after all this, people who call themselves his family still dare to act like this? And you still insist on doing things this way? The anger in that voice only deepened, sharp enough to make the entire room tense. The people being condemned were lined up in silence, forced to stand there and absorb the full weight of that wrath without daring to interrupt. Rosa Runcandle was absolutely furious, her presence flaring as she roared. How dare you send the youngest into the territory of Debo's remains, you shameless bastards. Her voice struck the room like a whip, and no one could pretend not to understand her anger. Just then, the door slowly opened, and the atmosphere shifted ever so slightly as someone stepped inside. The moment Rosa Runcandle saw who it was, her voice softened. You're here. Jean Runcandle immediately answered with respect. Yes, mother. Even in that heated room, his tone remained composed. Standing there as well was Mew Runcandle, the third flag-bearer of the Runcandle family, a girl with long gray hair and a proud, sharp presence that was impossible to miss. Next to her were and Runcandle, the fifth flag bearer of the Runcandle family, and Vigo Runcandle, the sixth flag bearer. Together, the three of them formed a tense and dangerous lineup, each carrying the weight of their status like drawn blades. Rosa Runcandle turned back toward Jean Runcandle and asked, "Have you already heard that your next mission is the Cologne ruins?" Her voice was calmer now, but the concern beneath it was unmistakable. Jean Runcandle answered evenly, "I have." Rosa Runcandle, having regained some of her composure, spoke at once. "That mission has been cancelled. You are not going to Cologne." Her decision was firm and left no room for misunderstanding. The moment those words were spoken, both Mew Runcandle and Runcandle reacted in shock and cried out, "Mother!" Rosa Runcandle instantly snapped back at them, unable to hold her fury in any longer. "Shut up. All you bastards ever think about is finding ways to kill him." Her voice rose again, raw with anger and disgust. Mew Runcandle lightly touched her chest as if staying perfectly calm, then asked in a cold, almost casual tone, "Mother, is it really strange that we're trying to kill him?" The question was shocking, but the fact that she said it so naturally made it even worse. And Runcandle immediately backed her up and added with open dissatisfaction, "That's right. Honestly, I still don't understand why you're trying so hard to protect him." There was no attempt to hide her resentment. "What?" Rosa Runcandle felt a wave of helpless disbelief rise inside her. For a moment, it was as though she could not believe what she was hearing from her own children. But before she could fully respond, more protests began to rise from the room again. "Both father and mother have always quietly encouraged the siblings to fight among themselves, haven't you?" one of them argued. "That's how our family works. Competition is necessary for the clan to survive. Mother, you know better than anyone that every child here was raised in rivalry from the moment they were young." "That's right, Mother," another voice added. "I was sent on extremely dangerous missions many times even when I had only just reached the intermediate level." Hearing those words, Rosa Runcandle fell silent for a brief moment, as if she could not simply deny what had always been true. Then she slowly closed her eyes and spoke with helpless restraint. "Yes, you're right. Competition is necessary, no matter the method or what lies beneath it." But then she opened her eyes again and asked a question that cut through the room like a blade. "But has any one of you become a 5-star knight at only 15 years old? Has there?" The question left the room hanging in silence. Both Mew Runcandle and Runcandle were visibly shaken when they heard it. "Huh." Neither of them had an answer ready. Jean Runcandle remained silent, while Rosa Runcandle spoke again in a cold, decisive voice. "The youngest is different from all of you. If either of you had achieved what he did as a child, I would have protected you just the same." But while everyone else kept pushing and clashing with words, Jean Runcandle simply stood off to the side, covering his mouth as he let out a quiet yawn, as if the argument unfolding in front of him was both noisy and predictable. Rosa Runcandle continued, driving her words straight into the pride of the other flag-bearers. "In other words, none of you are worthy of that level of protection. Looking at you now, even though you are already knights, I do not regret saying that in the slightest." Then she turned her attention to those who had remained mostly quiet until then, and Mew Runcandle, and Vigo Runcandle. "As knights, the three of you will also be held responsible for the chaos caused here today." Her judgment was immediate and merciless. Mew Runcandle will discipline herself starting now, and Runcandle and Vigo Runcandle will each return 1 high-grade sword of the clan currently in their possession. The punishment was not light, and everyone in the room knew it. Hearing that, Vigo Runcandle protested with obvious dissatisfaction. "Mother, what do you mean, return a sword?" Rosa Runcandle did not waver in the slightest. "If I were handling this entirely my own way, I would confiscate every high-grade sword you possess. So be grateful I am being this lenient." Vigo Runcandle could only grit his teeth, visibly annoyed, but he had no choice except to accept it. Jean Runcandle now stood in the middle of what felt like a den full of tigers and leopards. After a long exchange, Rosa Runcandle finally turned to look at him with quiet expectation and asked, "All right then, what will you do now, youngest son?" In a situation where even uninvolved siblings have been dragged into this mess, will you stand there pretending to be righteous and demand that I punish them all more severely? Or will you accept this favoritism and become arrogant because it benefits you? Her eyes were fixed on him, testing him from the bottom of her heart. Let me see how you handle this. Rosa Runcandle was clearly watching for his answer, curious about what kind of choice Jean Runcandle would make under pressure. At that very moment, Jean Runcandle finally raised his voice and addressed his mother directly. Rosa Runcandle turned to him with a sharp, piercing gaze and answered, "Speak, my son." The room felt even quieter, as if everyone knew the next few words would matter. Jean Runcandle immediately put on a bright, almost innocent smile and said, "I actually like the mission that Mew Runcandle assigned to me." The answer was so unexpected that it startled nearly everyone present. Rosa Runcandle's eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly asked, "Do you even know what the Cologne ruins are?" She finished. Jean Runcandle answered with steady confidence, and the reaction from Mew Runcandle and in Runcandle was one of obvious delight and surprise. "Yes," Jean Runcandle said. "It's a section of Zippel territory that the Runcandle family once tried to conquer in the past, but failed to fully take." His answer was clear and precise, leaving no doubt that he understood exactly what kind of place it was. "I know it's dangerous," he continued, and his expression turned sharp and resolute as he spoke, "but that doesn't change my decision." There was no hesitation left in his face now. "I have no intention of backing away from this." Jean Runcandle stood tall and declared confidently, "I actually appreciate the mission my sisters arranged for me. I know how dangerous it is, but I don't see it as unfair. Not at all. On the contrary, it feels more like a sign that my sisters acknowledge my abilities," he said. Hearing that, one of them could only respond in confusion. "What?" Jean Runcandle continued at once. "Isn't that the reason they sent me on this mission in the first place?" At those words, suspicion flickered across Rosa Runcandle's face. Was he simply being brave, or was he subtly accusing even his own mother of interfering too much? Jean Runcandle answered plainly, "No." Then he explained, "If the mission assignment is suddenly changed now, the people who serve our clan may begin to think that the clan's standards and strength are weakening. That kind of impression would do more harm than good." Rosa Runcandle frowned and shot back at once. "We do not have subordinates foolish enough to doubt the clan over something so small. Your sisters simply want to hurt you. Since they cannot fight you directly, they are using their authority to stir up chaos instead." But Jean Runcandle did not back down. "That is also the battle I want to fight, Mother. If I had to clash with my sisters directly right now, I would definitely lose. But I can strike back another way, by completing this mission flawlessly and proving myself through the result. This is a battle I actually have a chance of winning." Rosa Runcandle still looked as though she wanted to stop him. "One wrong step in the Cologne ruins could cost you your life. Are you truly confident?" Even then, Jean Runcandle answered without wavering, "Yes, and I have one small request as well. If I can return from this mission alive and finish it properly, then please grant me the sword my brothers brought back. That is the reward I want." The moment those words left his mouth, the two people in front of him visibly stiffened, their surprise quickly turning into panic. Jean Runcandle, however, continued speaking as if he were discussing something trivial. "I think that is the very least I should receive as compensation. You were the ones who said this mission was extremely dangerous." After hearing that calm, cutting response, she could only fall silent. Joshua Runcandle scratched his head in helpless frustration before speaking. "Jean Runcandle, why are you so obsessed with keeping that sword? We already brought them back. If you need a sword that badly, I'll give you one of mine. So please just give up on this mission. You need to stay alive at least until Father returns." Jean Runcandle looked genuinely taken aback and answered, "What you're saying doesn't make sense. If you really thought there was a problem, then shouldn't you have stopped and Runcandle and Mew Runcandle when they entrusted this mission to me in the first place?" Before the argument could flare up any further, Rosa Runcandle's voice cut through the room and stopped everything at once. "Enough. If you truly complete the mission and return without harm, I will give you your brother's swords. You may all leave now." The others, clearly dissatisfied, cried out unwillingly, "Mother!" But Rosa Runcandle remained where she stood, deep in thought, troubled by the fear that Jean Runcandle might become another Luna Runcandle. Had she already trampled too much on the honor of her other children? But in the end, it seemed her worry had been unnecessary. When Chiron Runcandle returned, he would surely feel proud of how much Jean Runcandle had grown. That thought brought a clear, satisfied expression to her face. By then, Jean Runcandle had already finished speaking and reached the door, but just as he was about to leave, Rosa Runcandle suddenly spoke again. "What are you thinking?" she asked in a low voice. "Are you still dreaming that luck will stay on your side forever?" Jean Runcandle rested a hand on the doorknob and answered in the same casual tone as ever. "I don't know. My siblings may not realize it, but I'm actually an extremely unlucky person." His indifferent attitude only made her angrier. "Enough of that careless attitude. This is not some personal errand. From the moment you head down to the lower realm, you will not be alone for even a second during the entire journey." Jean Runcandle still kept his manners and answered politely, "Thank you for your concern." Then Gilly McLaurin turned back, gave them a cold glance, and said, "Goodbye for now. See you later." A little while afterward, Jean Runcandle, now dressed in white, stood speaking with Khan's group. One of them smiled and introduced himself. "Allow us to introduce ourselves properly, young Master Jean Runcandle. My name is Mal Hensock. I will be accompanying you on this mission." Another quickly followed with a friendly tone. "I am Rema. It's an honor to be sent on a mission with you, young master. I also want to apologize for how I acted before. We will not disappoint you." The two of them spoke with warm, practiced friendliness. Kashmir, who had also reigned in his usual personality, placed a hand over his chest and spoke respectfully as well. "The same goes for me." Hearing that, Jean Runcandle turned away and said, "Fine. Let's leave the past alone and focus on completing the mission properly together." "Yes, thank you, young master," they answered at once. As he turned his back on them, Jean Runcandle clicked his tongue inwardly. "Honor my ass. All three of them are, and Runcandle and Mew Runcandle's dogs. The moment I'm actually in danger, they'll stab me in the back without hesitation." Just then, Mal Hensock pulled out a document and spoke in a businesslike tone. "I'll explain this mission in a little more detail. Our mission is to strike the totems. The location is Zitkum, and our specific target is 4 separate totems hidden there. Zitkum was once a land where thousands of indigenous people lived in tribal communities. At present, that territory is under the control of the Zippel-affiliated clan subordinate to the Pylon Kingdom. The ruins there were first discovered a few hundred years ago by members of that clan. After uncovering the historic site, they found something they considered far more valuable than the land itself. They slaughtered a large portion of the native people and forced the survivors into slavery, wiping out most of the original population in the process. Of course, the present-day clan claims that it respects the Collins natives, but that is nothing more than a polished lie meant to save face. On the surface, the Collins people are treated with dignity, but in truth they are still little more than slaves. There are no real policies meant to improve their lives, because to most of humanity, the lives and rights of the Collins people are worth almost nothing. The reason the clan spared the Collins at all was to preserve the natural environment around the ruins and to put on a show of atoning for past cruelty. They usually prefer to present themselves as rulers with reasonable laws, people who win voluntary obedience from those under their control. That image of fairness is one they guard very carefully. But when it came to the Collins ruins, they went far beyond the line. They were willing to throw away even their reputation for the sake of what was hidden there. The reason they became so obsessed with the Collins ruins, to the point of sacrificing their own image, was because of a relic mirror hidden by the natives. By then, Jean Runcandle and Mal Hensock's group had already arrived in the area and were moving forward with great caution. The existence of that mirror was still a closely guarded secret, known only within the Zippel side. But before my regression, the truth had been dragged into the light by one fearless journalist. The article that journalist wrote exposed the clan's actions and argued that everything they had done in that region was really for the sake of locating a single relic. According to testimony gathered from the indigenous people, the name of that relic was the source of mana, and it was said to be no ordinary treasure. Just looking into it was enough to raise a person's mana capacity to an absurd, almost unbelievable degree. By making use of that relic, the Zippel side was able to create an enormous number of mass-produced mages. They would only begin producing those mages about 10 years from now, which meant one thing. They still had not obtained the source of mana yet. The members of Malhensik's group exchanged glances and gave each other small nods. Jean Runcandle tightened his grip on his sword, his resolve hardening. No matter what happened, he would never allow that thing to fall into Zippel's hands again. At that moment, a hushed voice broke the silence. "Young master, the mages are returning. Their current position is near the rendezvous point used by the Jif mages, and the totems we need are being stored inside warehouse number 3. Malhensak continued in a low voice. "I'll outline the plan. Launching a surprise attack itself won't be difficult, but there will definitely be defensive magic in place." Kashmir immediately added, wearing an earnest expression that felt almost too sincere. "Please don't worry, young master. No matter what happens, we will protect you, even if it costs us our lives." Hearing that, Jean Runcandle almost felt speechless. Still, he answered with perfect courtesy. "Thank you for the reassurance. If we want to return safely, then we need to preserve our strength and avoid wasting stamina before the attack. Let's rest for a while and move in an hour," Jean Runcandle said as he took out an item. Kashmir immediately lowered his head and replied, "As you command." Jean Runcandle then pulled out a packet of dried meat and handed it over. "Everyone, eat some of this first." "Thank you." Malhensak calmly accepted a piece and began eating. Rema and Kashmir followed without hesitation, chewing it down as they recovered their strength. After quietly waiting for the others to finish eating, Jean Runcandle finally spoke again. "Well then, I'll be moving alone from here. The rest of you should get some sleep." As he said it, he raised his collar and pulled it up enough to cover part of his face. Malhensak immediately panicked. What do you mean, young master?" Kashmir also looked bewildered and blurted out, "Huh? What is this? Poison." Jean Runcandle calmly reassured them. "Don't worry. It's only a sleeping drug." They tried to resist as the medicine began to take effect, but their bodies were already giving out. Jean Runcandle stood there watching each of them collapse one by one, then muttered under his breath, "No. Hell no. You really want to make it that obvious that you came here to kill me?" He waited until all of them were fully unconscious before finally turning away. "Honestly, I'd be less suspicious if you idiots just acted like the bastards you usually are." Jean Runcandle adjusted his collar again and let out a bitter scoff. "I guess even dogs can't go against the instincts drilled into them by their masters." With that, he left the place completely alone, stepping forward into the mission by himself without looking back. The scene shifted to an entirely different location, and the atmosphere changed at once, growing heavier, quieter, and far more dangerous than before. 2 guards were standing watch together outside the area. One of them was yawning lazily, clearly bored out of his mind, while the other chatted away in a cheerful voice. "That's exactly why I snatched the bottle of wine," he said with a grin. But the gossiping guard's relaxed face did not last long. Before his smile could even settle, he suddenly looked forward in horror, his expression twisting in shock. Jean Runcandle appeared in an instant and drove a brutal kick straight into the other soldier's face, dropping him before he could even cry out properly. The remaining guard, dressed in a black coat, hurriedly raised his spear in a defensive stance and shouted in confusion, "Why you? Who are you?" Jean Runcandle's sharp eyes flashed coldly. Then, without the slightest panic, he leaned his body back and narrowly avoided the incoming strike. His body twisted fluidly through the air, spinning with the kind of precise balance that only came from real combat experience. A sharp glint cut across the darkness in the next instant, fast and clean, like a flash of steel slicing through silence. The last black-clad soldier was taken down almost immediately, dealt with so quickly that he barely had time to understand what had happened. A heavy blow struck his neck, and his face contorted with pain before his body gave out beneath him. After putting both men down, Jean Runcandle stepped inside, his posture steady and alert as his gaze swept through the area. "Only 2 of them," he thought calmly. "It looks like there aren't any other guards posted outside." Then he suddenly stopped, as if some small but important detail had clicked into place in his mind. He picked up the lock and examined it, unable to hide his suspicion. It was an absurdly simple lock, and there wasn't even any warning magic cast on it. Well, I guess that explains it, he thought. Sometimes they even have ordinary commoners guarding warehouse number 3. Looks like the Zippel side doesn't value this place very much at all. Should I have a look inside? After a brief pause, Gene Runcandle made up his mind and pushed the door open without hesitation, stepping in carefully but decisively. The moment he saw the pattern drawn across the floor, his eyes sharpened. A blood magic detection circle. He realized at once, his mind instantly going on alert. It was commonly known as a security spell used to check whether someone carried the clan's bloodline and whether that blood was pure. But its real purpose was different. In truth, it distinguished normal humans from demonic beasts, and it could even detect certain diseases. Gene Runcandle crouched slightly and studied the blood magic with careful, focused eyes. So as long as the blood belongs to a normal human, the owner doesn't really matter. Thinking quickly, he moved back to where one of the fallen guards lay and sliced the man's hand just enough to draw blood. Blood slowly welled out from the cut, dark and thick in the dim light. There's no need to use my own blood and leave evidence behind. After collecting enough, Gene Runcandle returned to the array and poured the stolen blood onto the circle. The moment the blood touched the pattern, the markings began to shift and writhe, changing shape almost immediately. After handling that first step, he quickly moved on in his mind to what would come next. So the first layer of protection was simple too. Then where's the golem? Suddenly, the blood circle flared with violent force, erupting with a surge of energy far stronger than he had expected. Gene Runcandle's eyes widened in shock. I used the blood of an unconscious guard. It should have counted as normal human blood. So why did the blood detection circle still activate? That means that man was already infected with some kind of disease, he concluded in an instant, his expression tightening. At that moment, ferocious faces began to form in the air above the circle. Their mouths were full of bared teeth, and their glowing eyes stared down at him with terrifying hostility. Gene Runcandle immediately reconsidered. Or maybe that thing wasn't human to begin with. A heartbeat later, Gene Runcandle had no choice but to dodge quickly, his body moving on instinct before the attack could land. Damn it! What is this? He muttered, then used Silent Wind to stop the giant stone-like creatures rushing at him as if they wanted to tear him apart. If there were mages nearby, they could sense the mana he released, which was why he had intended to use as little mana as possible. But things had clearly changed now. Because of that sudden twist, sweat was already running down Gene Runcandle's face as he faced the situation, his nerves tightening under the pressure. The golem charged forward wildly, as if it had gone completely mad, its movements violent and unnatural. Gene Runcandle let out a silent groan in his heart. So I really can't avoid a fight after all. He evaded 2 attacks in quick succession, then drew his sword in one swift motion, the blade sliding free with a hard metallic sound. The giant creature did not simply endure the attacks like a mindless target. It reacted in a way that felt disturbingly alive. It suddenly let out an agitated roar, then slashed at him with sharp claws. Gene Runcandle narrowly avoided the strike by flipping away at the last possible moment. He landed and tried to steady himself on the ground, boots scraping lightly as he regained his balance. Gene Runcandle lowered his head for just a brief moment, then cursed under his breath, irritation and disbelief mixing together. Damn it! With a single powerful swing, he released a heavy sword strike and counterattacked the golem head-on. Seeing that, the creatures only became more enraged. They ground their teeth violently, and veins bulged all over their bodies in a way that looked horribly unnatural. At that point, Gene Runcandle spoke in a low, cutting voice. So you know it too. Aura is a very dangerous kind of power. Then, all of a sudden, one of the golems gave a strange wave of its hand, a small motion that felt deeply wrong. That brief movement made Gene Runcandle frown. It can heal its wounds that fast. That level of regeneration is something you usually only see in high-level demonic beasts, he thought, his unease growing sharper. But those things are not demonic beasts. Just a moment ago, they were human. This was Zippel-controlled territory, a place where countless migrant mages came and went in the shadows. The indigenous people here were being exploited and crushed under that system without mercy. And on top of that, There were these grotesque, mysterious monsters roaming around in secret. After putting the pieces together for a moment, Gene Runcandle's eyes widened, and he blurted out the conclusion. A primeval golem? Creating a primeval golem was a grave crime, the kind of forbidden act that should never have been touched. Just then, the golem stretched out its claws and lunged at him again with vicious force. Could it be? The Zippel side has been using this historic site as a laboratory for forbidden techniques? Gene Runcandle thought grimly as he raised his sword and parried the monster's crushing attack head-on. A primeval golem wielded strength that came close to a 4-star automaton, but only in raw power. Its movements lacked the polish, discipline, and precision of a truly seasoned 4-star knight. So in actual combat, bringing one down was not nearly as difficult as its presence first suggested. Under normal circumstances, a primeval golem would keep attacking no matter how badly its body was damaged, as if pain meant nothing to it at all. But the moment its core was destroyed, everything ended instantly, and the monster could do nothing but collapse. The core was usually hidden in one of 3 places: the head, the heart, or the torso. That basic rule did not change even for primeval golems created through forbidden arts. Realizing that, Gene Runcandle raised his sword without hesitation and drove it forward first. Gene Runcandle brought his blade crashing down on the golem's head, and the creature answered with a deafening roar that shook the air around them. At the same time, the hand that had been reaching toward him faltered for just a brief moment, as if the strike had interrupted its murderous rhythm. Then, without warning, another attack came slicing in from the side. Gene Runcandle caught it in an instant and bent his body away with sharp, practiced reflexes, narrowly avoiding the blow. Its strength and speed had not dropped at all. If anything, they had become even more violent. The golem whose head Gene Runcandle had struck was now grotesquely deformed, yet it still rampaged forward with terrifying force, crazed and relentless. If the core was not in the head, then there were only the other possibilities left. While continuing to evade the rain of slashes, Gene Runcandle kept calmly narrowing down the answer in his mind. Using all his strength, Gene Runcandle drove his sword deep into the golem's stomach, the impact heavy enough to jolt through his arm. Even then, he did not stop to celebrate or panic. He kept analyzing the creature with a cold, focused mind, reading its reactions in the middle of the fight. Then there was only one place left. With all his might gathered into a single strike, Gene Runcandle brought his sword down again and split the golem cleanly in 2. As fear seemed to pour out from the broken body, Gene Runcandle could not help but stare for a second and let out a stunned breath of shock. Unbelievable. You would do something like this to your own kind. But before the thought could settle, the remaining golem crept up behind Gene Runcandle in silence. He felt the killing intent at once, sharp and unmistakable, and reacted the moment it reached him. Without the slightest hesitation, Gene Runcandle turned and swung his sword in one decisive slash. The golem's eyes were bloodshot, and its face had twisted into a hideous expression that barely looked human anymore. It let out a savage roar, the kind of sound that made it seem as though the creature had completely lost its mind. Then cracks spread across the golem's body, and from those fractures a blinding surge of power burst outward in a brilliant flash. A moment later, that damaged body began to blow apart, exploding and breaking into scattered fragments before Gene Runcandle's eyes. When the second golem finally fell, Gene Runcandle let out a long, controlled breath. That spell had come dangerously close to being completed, and he knew just how bad things could have become if he had been even a little slower. How twisted, and yet how elaborate. Just then, a sudden sound rang out and cut through the silence. Please. The moment the voice reached him, Gene Runcandle froze. The gloomy, broken plea continued. Please kill me. The mangled golem sprawled on the ground was begging for death, its voice soaked in despair, so deep it felt heavier than the blood in the room. Seeing that, Gene Runcandle fell silent for a moment. Then he pressed his lips together, swallowed whatever he wanted to say, and gave a small, grim nod. All right. In the next instant, blood sprayed into the air, and with that final strike, he granted the creature's desperate wish. Gene Runcandle stood there for a long while, without moving. I don't know exactly what happened to these people, but he tightened his grip around his sword, his voice turning colder. No one in this world would willingly choose to become a primeval golem, especially knowing what waits at the end of that transformation. His eyes filled with a cold, cutting fury toward the wicked people behind this. Once someone was turned into one of those things, they became nothing more than an expendable pawn, stripped of any future and thrown away like trash. Now was not the time to drown in anger. An unexpected situation had unfolded here, and on top of that, he had uncovered a terrible secret tied to the Zippel clan. He even suspected that she had known about this before assigning him the mission in the first place. Still, that did not make his mission any less important, or any easier to handle openly. Even if he exposed this now, the Zippel clan would most likely deny everything without the slightest shame. At that point, Jean Runcandle bent down and picked up a fragment from the ground. Creating a primeval golem was a grave crime, and even suspicion alone would be enough to draw an official investigation from the Empire. First, I need evidence. Then I continue the mission. Even with my authority, I cannot move carelessly without proof. The Zippel clan would almost certainly interfere with any investigation the moment it began, and he understood that all too well. Still, that was not a problem he could solve right now. More importantly, the mages had not made any move yet, which meant they still believed this place was nothing more than an ordinary warehouse. If they had known primeval golems were being kept here, there was no way they would have left the place guarded this loosely and carelessly. That led Jean Runcandle to believe that not everyone in Zippel was involved in the use of forbidden magic. The protective spell placed on the stone slab looked simple on the surface, but in truth, it was layered and tricky. Normally, breaking through that kind of protection would take considerable effort. But now that the two primeval golems were dead, whatever happened here next was something the Zippel clan would have no choice but to cover up quietly. At that moment, a sphere of power slowly formed in Jean Runcandle's hand, dense and unstable, humming with restrained force. The vaguely shaped sphere split into two halves, one of fire and one of water. After separating the two energies, Jean Runcandle spoke to himself once more in a low voice. That was why the two powers kept growing stronger with every passing second, becoming more brilliant, more mysterious, and harder to control. Even as they transformed in his grasp, Jean Runcandle calmly calculated his next move again. I'll use a little heat. With that quiet decision, he activated the fire blast technique. A powerful surge of energy erupted at once, shaking the surrounding space so violently that the entire area seemed to tremble under the force. Elsewhere, an angry voice suddenly rang out in sharp disbelief. What the hell have you bastards done? You sent him on a mission in Zippel clan territory? Have you all lost your minds? Mew Runcandle and Runcandle, bruised and struggling, sat on the ground while enduring the harsh scolding. That boy is a child 10 years younger than you, Luna Runcandle said sternly. Why would you do something like that? At that, one of them finally answered, You really don't know why, Sister Luna? Luna Runcandle shot back at once. As a matter of fact, what if I really don't know? Or are you trying to say that you two flag bearers of our clan are fighting a power struggle with Jean Runcandle? A kid who only just entered the intermediate class, and you flag bearers are treating him like a rival in a flag bearer conflict? But haven't your actions gone too far? Isn't there at least an unwritten rule in a two-star clan war? The two of them listened in silence, unable to say anything as Luna Runcandle's words came down on them one after another. Then Luna Runcandle turned to leave, but not before throwing one final remark over her shoulder. You should be ashamed of yourselves, because I am deeply ashamed that you are flag bearers of this clan. And after hearing that, one of them finally shouted in frustration, Eldest sister, you've never cared about power in the first place. So what right do you have to judge us like this? Luna Runcandle answered with calm, cutting confidence. I wouldn't be saying any of this if you could actually defeat Jean Runcandle. The moment those words landed, the two younger siblings could only stare back in open shock. Huh? They blurted out, completely thrown off by how direct she was. Then Luna Runcandle coldly delivered the result that mattered most. Jean Runcandle has already completed his mission in Zippel clan territory. Mother will be receiving the report immediately. Her voice was steady and firm, leaving no room for excuses or denial. I'm sure you understand now why I said I was ashamed. Luna Runcandle's gaze stayed sharp as she continued. In the end, all you did was help that boy grow stronger. I don't even know if there has ever been a case in Runcandle history where flag bearers ended up humiliating themselves while trying to put their youngest sibling in his place. Now go. After hearing that, the two could only lower their heads and answer with quiet shame, "We understand." Just as the two were about to leave the room in silence, Luna Runcandle suddenly called out again, stopping them in their tracks. "And one more thing," she said, her voice lower now, but no less serious. "From what I've seen, Jean Runcandle is not especially noble." Luna Runcandle let the words hang for a moment before finishing. "From now on, the two of you had better be careful around him. I'm genuinely worried." It was not praise, and it was not mockery either. It was a clear warning. That single warning made the atmosphere in the room tighten all at once. For a short while, no one said anything, and the tension only grew heavier in the silence. But even so, Luna Runcandle added at last, her tone softening just a little, "You are still my younger siblings." Those words carried more warmth than the scolding before them, even if she did not say anything more. Sometime later, only Luna Runcandle remained in the room. Then Mrs. Nanny came in carrying a few things and let out a surprised sigh. Honestly, it's hard to believe the young lady came back and immediately started disciplining her younger sisters. "As your nanny, I thought you were already at an age where you'd be a little more easygoing." Hearing that, Luna Runcandle could only look at her in speechless disbelief. "At my age, easygoing?" she thought. But the older woman spoke again right away, her tone gentler this time. "Well, it is true that the young lady has been through quite a difficult life. I'm worried about the young ladies," Mrs. Nanny said as she poured the tea with practiced ease. "Young Master Jean Runcandle is not the kind of person who forgets things." Luna Runcandle quietly asked for her opinion. "Nanny, you also think those two are no match for Jean Runcandle, don't you?" Mrs. Nanny answered without hesitation. "Yes. For at least the next 5 years, I don't think they can defeat young Master Jean Runcandle, even in an official duel. They may have acted far too hastily." Luna Runcandle immediately frowned and replied, "Don't say something so cruel. They are still young, immature, and thoughtless." Even while defending them, however, she did not sound fully convinced herself. Then Luna Runcandle shifted the subject. "Nanny, did you look into what I asked you to investigate?" Mrs. Nanny looked back at her and asked in return, "You mean the person who tried to assassinate young Master Jean Runcandle, right?" "Yes," she answered before continuing on her own. "It definitely wasn't the two young ladies. At the time, they were still in the intermediate class, so there is no real reason to keep investigating them." Luna Runcandle nodded slightly. "You're right. It probably wasn't Mary Runcandle, Yona Runcandle, or the Tana twins either." That narrowed the list further. The names that remained were then laid out one by one. Joshua Runcandle, Dyfus Runcandle, Jean Runcandle, Vigo Runcandle, and Runtia Runcandle. Aside from Jean Runcandle and Vigo Runcandle, the others will be very difficult to investigate properly, Luna Runcandle said, thinking through each possibility with care. Taking a slow sip of tea, Luna Runcandle continued, "Of course, the other three all have strong foundations behind them." Her eyes stayed lowered on the cup, but her mind was already moving several steps ahead.